Hello and welcome to this short explanation of functionalist perspectives on crime and deviance. So this is part 2 because we've explained benefits of crime and deviance according to functionalists. But now we're going to explain the reasons for crime and deviance according to functionalists. So firstly, we're going to look at Durkheim's view. Émile Durkheim, French sociologist, 1893 published key explanations of crime and deviance, so the 19th century. He was influenced by the Hobbesian view of human nature. So Thomas Hobbes, 17th century philosopher, argues human nature is selfish. We have a limited individual perspective of the world. According to Hobbes, in a state of nature, that is, without society, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. So there would be a war of all against all. So there's this sense that human beings are rational animals. And if there is no social order, which means the stable, consistent, and predictable patterns of relationships and interactions and identities, there will be anarchy, which is a world without leaders, and there will be chaos. There will be no predictability to relationships. People will be fulfilling selfish desires at their whim, based on their will, rather than the wider good of all. So a social contract or agreement between all members of society is required to unite and bond them together as a collective or group. So Durkheim agreed with this view and he added to it. So he argued for a Homo duplex model of humanity. Homo duplex, man is two-sided. So on the one hand we are selfish. On the other hand we are capable of learning morals. So influenced by John Locke's view of humans as tabula rasa, blank slate, he argues that we are coming to this world without knowledge. We have instincts, basic instincts, sexual, to be significant, to be loved, and so on. However, we have to learn morals in order to check or control and limit and restrain natural desires. Also, human beings are naturally different. So human behaviour is unpredictable, naturally, because we are different in terms of aptitudes or abilities. The extent to which we can apply certain skills, physical skills and powers, intellectual abilities. We also have different levels of conscientiousness naturally. Some of us will apply more effort, some less. So social order, a stable pattern of relationships, social structure, large-scale patterns of behaviour, institutions, patterns of behaviour with a purpose or a role, such as the family, all of these are necessary and positive and useful and beneficial, based on this view of human nature. So the cause of crime and deviance is a result of a lack of attachment to the prevailing consensus over collective values. A lack of attachment where people are not closely bonded enough to the prevailing consensus, the widely shared agreement over right and wrong, what is important, worthwhile and desirable values. So where people are less attached to those wider norms and values, this results in crime and deviance. Since without social order, people are naturally selfish, they will therefore satisfy their own individual desires. Hence, there will be crime and deviance. So crime is inevitable because human beings are unpredictable and human beings are naturally different, selfish, although capable of learning morality. So crime and deviance is inevitable. Even in a society of angels, there will be deviance. People will still commit deviant acts in a very tightly controlled society because of unpredictability, because of human nature. The reason for a lack of attachment to the norms and values is to do with social changes. We can talk about 4 types of changes. Social changes in terms of cultural institutions like the family, religion, education, which act to regulate behaviour and provide for certain needs of society, whether economic, material needs or emotional needs in terms of care and love. Groups can change in terms of their status, their rights, their influence, their position. Social groups, class groups, age groups, gender groups, ethnic groups. So there are fluctuations in their level of status and so on. So there can be social changes, political changes, the rights and influence of certain groups, the power of certain groups, how much groups are represented and have influence. Economic changes, how people work, earn money, how much people own in terms of property, consumption, how people live their lives based on buying, spending, lifestyles, and cultural changes, norms and values, how those are changing, so there's either more permissiveness or tighter boundaries. So with all of these changes, this creates less certainty, less stability, and less consistency. The social order is threatened, or there is less of a clear social order. People find it harder to answer the question, who am I? What is my purpose? And in that situation where there's less clear sense of norms and a framework for your lives and your place in that framework, we have what Durkheim calls anomie, a sense of normlessness, confusion over your place in the world. Anomie can be seen as either a permanent feature or a temporary feature of society. It could be a result of economic changes like 1998, the credit crunch, 1998 onwards, people losing their jobs, mortgages, the suicide rate increasing in some countries, and so on. Related to these changes, we have a sense of anomie. So that can explain crime. There are several problems with this view. It's a pessimistic view of human nature. Okay, it underplays how we self-define our identities, as well as having them defined by the wider structure. So the social action views, like interactionists, would argue that the functionalists overplay the extent to which structures determine our lives, and underplay the extent to which we are active in forming our own identities. The Marxists would argue that human selfishness, this view of human nature, according to functionalists, ignores how we are naturally wise and benevolent. We're wise, we can exercise reasoning, rationality. We're benevolent, we are kind and loving. Naturally. It is society which creates selfishness, not nature which creates greed. So the Marxists argue that the functionalists are overly pessimistic and too conservative in their view of society, because they want to keep tradition to preserve social order. The Marxists argue we're fundamentally equal in having consciousness, awareness, wisdom and benevolence. And the functionalists overplay the dark side of human nature. Also equality. Durkheim argued people are naturally different. The Marxists argue people are fundamentally equal. And therefore, again, this idea of meritocracy, equal opportunities, and the problem of poverty creating crime, seen as partly to do with individual choices. But the Marxists would say instead that it is society and the social structure which affects choices. And therefore, in that sense, it's the social structure which creates selfishness and must explain crime. If you have any questions about this, please email Daniel_Butcher at hotmail.co.uk.